I saw one of the lawyers who led the legal team for the Students for Fair Admissions interview. And his argument was there are three kinds of students here that Harvard is recruiting. There are the minority students on their affirmative action, the non-Asian minority students. There are the geniuses, the people with very high intellectual performance measured by test scores and so forth. And then there are the rich kids, the alumni, the legacies. He says, it's really all about the rich kids. Everything else is in the service of taking care of the rich kids. So you need the geniuses around so that the school can maintain its reputation as a place where geniuses produce amazing intellectual contribution. You need the minority kids because you have to be on the right side of history as far as social justice is concerned. But that's the tail. The dog is the rich kids. The center of the enterprise is about cultivating this cadre of ultra elite, wealthy families, loyalty to the institution, building the endowment, and taking care of your core constituency, he says, which for a place like Harvard are the wealthy families that send their kids there.
Talking about diversity, right? Like my question is always like, well, who is the beneficiary of the diversity? It is the rich kids, right? The way that they talk about it is very clear on this. They say, like, I remember that I was reading some brief and it was about Harvard admissions officers talking about how they thought about diversity. And they're saying, well, it would be nice if, like, we imagined three kids sleeping in a dorm room together, that they had different experiences. And one of them could talk about their experiences being, for example, I don't know, let's say, like, for me, right, like a Korean-American immigrant who is not born here in the United States, right? And one of them was like a student from Deerfield who grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts, right? And the other one was a Black student from Idaho who had grown up on a farm or something like that. And it's like, the way that this happens is that my job is to, like, bring a bag of kimchi to the rich kid, you know, and to be like, hey, aren't we all great? That's why I'm here. Like, I'm here to, like, perform almost like a cultural theater, right? If you think about it in that sort of way, who is the person that doesn't have to perform the cultural theater in that sense, right? It's the rich kid, right? Like, the rich kid is the standard there. I don't know. I just find it weird to think that way, right? Like, I would never try and do that type of thing in my personal life. I hope I don't do it in my professional life. But, like, this whole thing where the idea is that, like, everybody has to perform a diverse type of function so that the campus is vibrant in this way. Like, it really feels like, if you take a step back, that it is all sort of in the service of the rich kids, as you said. And the best evidence for that is exactly how the Harvard admissions officers talked about it over and over and over again, right? They would come up with these ludicrous scenarios that were all hypothetical about students sitting together or sleeping together or, like, sharing a room together or sitting in the library together. And the idea was always like, well, what if, you know, like, the Latino person could bring some of their Latino flavor, you know, or the Asian person could talk about hard work. And it's just like, you know, like, this is just baseline racist stuff.
But no, a lot of Asian kids supported the university in its effort to avoid the repercussions of the Student for Fair Admission lawsuit. How so?
You know, I think that they're people, and I think that they're well-intentioned, and I think maybe they're right. I remember I spoke to a Harvard student when I started doing my reporting, and she said, it's very difficult to have to choose between Harvard, you know, the institution, and Ed Blum, who is the lawyer the legal activist who brought this lawsuit. She felt in aggregate that perhaps it would be better to have affirmative action, to not have this thing struck down. And I think in some ways, and although she didn't say this, I imagine she might feel this way. And some other students I spoke to did feel this way and did express it explicitly, which is that they worried that a sense of racial solidarity, the idea of, like, people of color, for example, right, would be disrupted by something like this, right? That Asians, I don't know, if you study any type of Asian American history, or at least the sort of academic discussions about Asian American history, you come across this idea of, like, Asian Americans being used as a wedge, right? Like, to be placed in between Black and white communities or whatever, this idea of the model minority. And that they felt that this lawsuit, even if they did agree that Harvard was probably discriminating against them, that the destruction from being used in this type of way to end affirmative action effectively at these schools, that was more harmful. The good faith and I think the generous interpretation of this would say that. And I do think that many people, most of the people who are opposed to us, felt this way specifically. And then I think some people, you know, just are kind of locked into whatever side they're on, right? And they wanted to be on the progressive side, right? But I think for a lot of people who gave it a lot of thought, I think it was that. It was this idea of like, can we actually disrupt the people of color coalition? And dare we? I think it was that type of thinking.
Dare we less what? What's the negative consequence of disrupting? Not to be
Uh,
accepted as a member in good standing of the progressive pantheon of American society?
yeah,
I'm
yeah, I
guessing.
think so. Yeah, I think that's what it is. I've written a lot about this. I think ultimately it ends up being somewhat of a class issue. For example, I was not born in the United States. I grew up in North Carolina, but I live now in Berkeley, California. Before that, I lived in Brooklyn. Everyone that I worked at the New York Times and now I work at the New Yorker, the vast majority of the people that I interact with in any given day are wealthy progressives, very highly educated. That's true of most Asian people who go through elite schooling like I did. And I think that basically it's your social position is at stake in some ways. If you come out and you're against some of these things, I think a lot of people who are in the academy are very invested in the idea of an identity politics that does have a type of idea of people of color solidarity. I think for the academics, that is at risk if you come out against this. And I think that there is just a lot of fear that those types of ideas would be dismantled and broken down. I don't know. I don't think that it was a crazy thought that those people felt that way, but I just, I don't know. I think it just required them to overlook the clear discrimination that was happening against their own people. Like, I'm not beholden to any of those things. And so for me, the only thing is to just point out, hey, this is clear discrimination. And the other stuff I don't really care about. I do care about like the idea of solidarity and whatever, but I'm much more cynical about the idea that academic people of color coalition actually matters to the vast majority of Americans, including the people of those identities that they're trying to protect.